your content is allowed to be shitty. I think that's something a lot of people need to hear. Your content is allowed to be shitty. However, you can work towards it not being shitty, but you have to put out something shitty first.
Hello everybody, this is Very Interesting People, an interview-style podcast where we sit down with talented independent creators to talk about their craft, share some stories, and inspire you to get out there and create something yourself. I'm your host, Kiefer, and with me today is podcaster, content creator, and the founder of the Buzz Network, Keaton. How's it going today?
I'm doing all right. I mean, yeah, I'm just here to talk about stuff. I don't know, I just got brought here. Hello.
Yeah, we just brought him in off the street. Pretty cool guy. So for those who aren't already familiar with your content, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, okay. So I mostly am known for podcasting nowadays. I streamed a bit on Twitch to get affiliate and then immediately lost interest in that, as I tend to. Streaming is not really my thing anymore. I don't know if I get much joy out of it, but it was cool to hit the goal. Podcasts, again, are the focus. Running the Buzz Network, which is kind of like a still like soft launching podcast network of me and some other friends' podcasts, including yours, season 3, Carneycast, and probably even this podcast whenever that comes out. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I've done some production stuff in the past, but my main focus right now is just podcasting because I'm super cynical about standard content creation on YouTube in general.
Yeah, so what made you decide on podcasting over those other formats, even if it's not YouTube, like blogging, like other video platforms, or just live streaming interviews and things like that? Why podcasting over everything else?
I don't know why I fell in love with the podcast platform. I really enjoy editing podcasts, even though I'm really... I kind of push off doing them, but whenever I get around to it, I really enjoy the aspect of that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's like hey, you can listen to these people and become fake friends with them, or like, hey, you can hear an interesting perspective about stuff. I personally always gravitated towards comedy podcasts and stuff like that. So obviously my first podcasts were related to that. And then as I found my friend and co-host, Eric, and our similar interest was movies, our podcast tended to gravitate towards that with our mini-series MCU and Me to cover the Marvel Universe, and then now just covering movies as they come out because that's just something we're interested in.
So right now your main podcast, movie review show called Real Good Stuff, and you mentioned you did production in the past on television, film stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah. Film production is not what you think. Looking at it, you don't know until you're there. You don't know why all the people have to be hired that they do. The content that you see online made by companies like Rooster Teeth or any other company like that is spending a hell of a lot more money than you think on any given project, because so many people are involved in any kind of production. You have to pay for gaffers, grips, mics, and then extras and production assistants and directors and ADs and production coordinators, all that kind of crap. It's a lot more complicated than people think. That's for one thing. And they tend to be, depending on the shoot, can be incredibly disorganized and just kind of fucking figuring it out as they go along from the looks of it. But yeah, so I've been on a variety of stuff. From an ABC pilot, I was an extra on that, so I was there for a day or two. I've worked with Rooster Teeth as both a production assistant and an extra. I was an extra in their movie Bloodfest for a few days, and then I don't know, a variety of other stuff, a few web shorts that didn't pay me. Not that I'll call them out, but they fucking never paid me for my invoice that I sent them as a production assistant.
Oh, so you did build them?
Yeah, I build everything.
I've done some volunteer work, I guess. It's I donated my time to work on some local things. I didn't expect to get paid, but Ooh,
Well,
that's worse if it's like a small project and they just shaft you,
the
not
thing
paying
was,
you.
I would have totally been down because I was in a very like, oh my god, I want to get into the production space because I had just done like my first production assistant stuff for Rooster Teeth, and then I was like, oh yeah, I guess I could production assistant because some of the other people like a grip and a gaffer that I was pretty familiar with, they were going to work on it too, and they're like, oh yeah, he's a pretty cool guy. So I applied for it, used them as references, got on it, and then I was like, oh yeah, it's paid, right? And he was like, yeah, we could probably get you $50 a day. And I'm like, okay, cool. That makes it a lot more worth it because I have to drive into Austin and shit like that. And then I just didn't get paid ever, and he just lost contact with me. And he still puts out stuff now, but it's all listed as unpaid.
Oh, yikes.
Through the mailing list that I'm a part of. So never did a public call out thing on that, but you know.
Well, no one knows who he is. Hopefully he doesn't listen to this and get angry, takes you to
What
court for defamation.
What I'm absolutely sure he doesn't, and what I'm saying is completely correct, so it doesn't matter. All right.
So having that experience in production, especially related to, you know, film and television stuff, has that carried over into your podcasting, especially your movie review podcasting?
Sort of. The podcasts tend to be a little bit lighter. Like, it definitely helps me to notice things, like errors and stuff like that, although that's also part of my cynicism and just studying film a lot more in general. You do notice subtle improvements through stuff you wouldn't otherwise think about, like noise removal and sound mixing and stuff like that you wouldn't otherwise know about, but you can also learn that online. I think it'll mostly help me when it comes to ideally down the line, getting into film and directing and producing myself. It gave me an idea of budgeting. So like, I know how much a production assistant you can pay them. I know how much you can pay a grip or a gaffer. I know how much you can pay a camera guy, and he'll bring his own camera because if he likes you or something like that, so you don't have to pay for a 4K camera too. So it's learning budgeting and what you need to actually make like a small project function, so that once I actually save up money and I can maybe do something down the line, I know who I can call, possibly who get on the project, or what it'll cost, and just so that I'm not just an idiot running around with like a camera.
That's something I think a lot of people don't always think about with films. They always think the producer, executive producer, where in some cases they do just throw money at the project to get it done. But a lot of what producers do is more business and organizational, like the equivalent of being like a store manager, where you're making sure everyone knows what job they're supposed to do, where they're supposed to be, what time they're supposed to be there, you know, making sure everyone's getting paid, everyone's happy, making sure there's food there, especially for big productions where like it's a whole day. People got to eat.
Oh yeah,
like it's crazy. It's insane.
And of course that varies because I've been on sets of every size at this point. So I mean, like the small stuff for like the web, and then movie sets, and then pilot sets for TV. It all is different scales. I think the TV pilot probably had the bigger budget of any of those because there were so many people, so many extras, and so many people don't think about how much the extras, like the people in the background, get paid to be in it for like a split second or blurry in the background. Yeah, it's just, no one thinks about it.
Even then, on big shows like on The Walking Dead, where they have all those zombies, well, almost all those zombies in most situations are an extra.
Oh yeah, of course.
And they have to show up for the whole day. They have to get in like 3, 4, 5, sometimes 8 hours of makeup to be on screen, put 2 or 3 minutes, you know, get beat up, get stabbed, get shot, whatever, and go home. And each one of those people has to be paid for a full 8 to 10 hour workday.
Oh yeah.
And that's
I mean, pretty much any film set or any film thing, you're going to be there the entire day.
Oh yeah.
And a film day is not the same as a typical work day, your 9 to 5 or whatever, your 8 to 5s. A typical film day ranges from 12 hours on the super light end to like 16 hours on like the super. You're there at opening and you're there at close, which I have done as like a PA sometimes. You're there from you're picking the shit up to putting the shit away at the end of the day, driving all over the place. You can be there for 16 hours. You get the day rate no matter what.
Yeah.
As a PA. Sometimes you get overtime as an extra if it goes over like 8 hours, because usually extras aren't needed as long. But yeah, you have to clear out your calendar for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, bring snacks. Bring multiple water bottles.
They usually provide their own, from my experience at least.
Hopefully, yeah. That's the one thing that my first time producing, I directed and produced a music video, and it was a one-man show for the most part, except for I had a colorist in post-production. He wasn't even there, but he was the colorist. And I like the last minute, I realized, okay, we have like 4 extras showing up, and we have 1 bathroom at this film studio, and there's like no fridge. There's no food here. So I had to like pay one of the band members to drive out and get donuts and get pizza and get coffee and like water bottles and Gatorade. And it was, oh no, it's stressful. Like,
yeah, that's something you don't think about until you're oh yeah, because that's kind of like your thing. You're usually getting paid minimum wage if you're an extra, or as a PA, it's it's comparable to a day wage, but you're also not going to be a PA all the time.
Mm-hmm.
One of the benefits is getting paid lunches or whatever, and on the production side, you actually have to think about that. Like, oh yeah, we have to be able to feed 100 people over the course of an hour and then get right back to it.
Yeah, it's a lot. So having done that, and you mentioned that, in the future, you'd like to move towards actual productions. Is that something that you want to take the buzz into television film production, or do you want it to be more of like an online content creation platform?
It's changed a lot. Originally, my vision for the buzz was like a hub channel almost. So it's like, hey, you can be part of the buzz, you can make content for it, and we all kind of benefit at the end of the day. Because individual content creation, something I noticed early on, is like everyone's making their own thing. You get pretty disinterested making your own. Like if you're not profiting on your own channel and you're not profiting from a group channel, like there's nothing really going on. But it's a lot easier to put out consistently if it's a collaboration. People are working together to get stuff out more regularly, as opposed to everyone putting out on like individual channels. But something that comes along with that is promotion. For that, it's a lot of effort, and it wasn't really something I was prepared for. So I scaled it more towards podcasting specifically, because podcast networks are a thing now. So setting up advertisers for people, no matter what size they are, that's kind of what my goal for it is to be able to be more inclusive and provide more general advertisers for a larger group of people, as opposed to a focus at like the higher level podcasts and spending tens of thousands of dollars per ad read or whatever. It's more of like hey, what you contribute on your own channel. If you read out these ad reads, you're benefiting yourself as well as the network itself, because now there's the collaboration. Something I'd love to do down the line for the Buzz Network is also like collaboration events of some kind. Like, okay, everybody collaborate on some other podcast, so do a guest appearance or something like that. Because collaboration is kind of like the lifeblood of online creation. It's one of the easiest ways to organically reach different audiences. As far as scaling that with film production and stuff, I don't know, to be honest. I've had a lot of personal brands over the years. So I was DefendTheEnd at first, and then Skeleton Key was kind of going to be my general branding for a bit, not necessarily for everything like a channel name, but Skeleton Key might still be a good name for like film production stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Might still reuse that name and logo at some point. Something I thought about. And then the Buzz is just the full rebranding that I did after that. So it's hard to say. I'm not sure, to be honest. I would like to get into film production and not necessarily release that online directly. So like, I'm not going to make a feature-length film and just put it up on YouTube. As a small creator and somebody who's just getting into the film production business, I'll probably go a pretty traditional route with that. So film festivals, I'd probably end up having to produce my first film myself. So that's something I've kind of accepted at this point. It's incredibly hard to get people to give you money for no reason. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And that applies to basically any concept. So whether it's you're starting a business, you're doing a movie, you want to make a TV show, everybody thinks of ideas. Everybody wants to be a writer, everyone wants to be a director. The question is, can you find somebody to pay it, or can you save up your money and be able to pay for it yourself and not bankrupt yourself? So that's the kind of mindset I am in with hopefully making something down the line with that.
Because most films lately that I've seen, especially with smaller creators, it's relying mostly on grants from arts programs, whether that's federal or, in my case, provincial in Canada, or by state in the US. That's a lot of people really fight for those grants. There's only maybe 10, 20, sometimes if you're lucky 100 if it's a really popular state or province like British Columbia or California, or in Texas now that it's kind of Hollywood 2.0.
Yeah, sort of, yeah.
But it's really hard to get funding for that outside of maybe you get a lucky break, you pitch it to a network, someone like Adult Swim who funds a lot of independent projects, and maybe you're one of the 1,000 people's pitches who got through and got approved. or you resort to crowdfunding. You're just paying for it yourself, it's a really difficult thing, because for every successful, self-funded project or crowdfunded project, there's those who, maybe they get most of their funding, but they go over budget just because of whatever reason. It's not planned. Maybe someone had to cancel one day, so they had to push the shoot back or the production back. So you had to pay everyone for showing up that day, but you couldn't do anything that day. Or, a car breaks down when it's carrying equipment. You got to rent a new car, or you lose a camera, or, you lose a security deposit on a shoot location because you built fake blood on the floor and it stained it. There's a lot to worry about.
That's definitely a fear that, as someone who's tried to budget that kind of thing before, for even like a 20 shoot film day, which is probably pretty lean by most standards, it's a lot of money, and there's so many unexpected factors when it comes to getting a large amount of people together. I don't know, it's hectic. That's to say the least.
That's why so many people ask, why are they only making remakes, or they're only making superhero movies? It's because those are proven to work. Because if it doesn't work, especially for a big budget film, those companies could go under. They could go bankrupt. Yeah. Like places like the CG company that did animation on a lot of projects, especially Life of Pi was the last one they did. They went bankrupt because they couldn't get enough bids to stay afloat. And one of their movies they did, and they ran into a production snag, and they went under. It's like easy as that. You could be doing great, and immediately you go under. And especially for independent people, it's tough.
Yeah. So start small scale.
Start small scale.
Don't start $1 million Kickstarter when you have no audience or wealthy relatives. Like, it's just not going to happen, in my opinion. Your Kickstarter, you can absolutely do Kickstarter if you have an audience or you have a proven track record. Kickstarter or any other crowdfunding thing is just a more public investment and producing method. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. In general, I think it's just easier to do stuff when you have a portfolio. You've had stuff made before. Like, for example, you've made music videos, which is more like stuff that you can show, like, oh yeah, I directed this live action thing. It's all helping to build a resume, to build confidence in somebody else, like, oh yes, I would pay for you to make stuff. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to let you go off and make your, magnum opus on the first try. They'll probably give you a budget and be like, hey, make it family friendly. Or if you're a Marvel director where they pick up a ton of like small independent directors for these huge movies, you're probably kind of a little bit on rails as far as making that movie. You got to start small, scale up slowly. Nobody's going to give you anything for free, more than likely. If they do, you're super lucky. Try not to waste it.
Yeah, just take it, run with it, do as much as you can if you're getting free stuff, because it's 1 in a million. Yeah, so as a small creator yourself, independent creator, how do you stay motivated working towards these goals while, continuing to put your nose to the grindstone with your current projects?
Yeah, so one reason that podcasts are pretty enjoyable is that you can put them out on a pretty regular basis. I'm always the editor for my own podcasts as of right now, because I refuse to pay anyone to do it, and I don't really trust other people to do it in the same way that I would. I personally put them out relatively consistently, and I've moved away from like Let's Play content or streaming. I more so focus on like my real job to gather money at the moment, which is semi-industry related, but also not really. Like, it's nothing I can write home about or put in my Twitter profile, but it earns me money, gets me experience in like management, which even is something that can translate over to production in some way. But while I figure out what I want to do with my money once it's saved, and then also what do I want to be? Because do I want to be an actor? Do I want to focus on writing? Do I want to be a producer full-time? Do I want to be a director full-time? I'm overly ambitious sometimes, to a fault of like my to-do list for life. So I just got to probably narrow it down, or just kind of start making my way through them and figure out which works best, what I can do consistently for work. And ideally, I don't have to work a day job all the time, and I can do something I love that earns me money, and I can also be doing creative stuff to do that job. You know what I mean?
So going back to the Buzz Network for a second, what was it like starting it up and getting in touch with all of the advertisers for the first time?
I won't tell you who I've reached out or anything like that, but this goes to the people out there listening, but what's the name of the strategy I think that I've kind of went with when it came to advertising and trying to find people, is that you can be told no 99 times, but on the 100th try, you still might get a yes. So it doesn't hurt to ask, no matter what size. So obviously our podcast at this level tend to be on like the smaller side, but even then there's still value to certain companies. So some companies just want people to talk about their product, period, and they don't want to spend $20,000 in ad read on some bigger podcast. So usually they'll do affiliate programs and stuff like that. And it kind of helps to reach out to those people for either better deals or some sort of group project kind of stuff so that everything will be set up for my podcast, your podcast, season 3's podcast, this new show. So it's not only setting the foundation, be like, hey, can I get a special code for this one podcast? It's building a relationship to be like, hey, we're a growing network. Ideally, we'll probably have more people. Will you be able to add more codes later on? Will we be in communication? How easy is it going to be able to pay people whenever it comes down to that? So a lot of just setting the groundwork personally. And as with any project in life, research, look into what you're doing, find the best platforms for you. If it's podcasting, look into RSS hosting, like stuff like that. Find friends that'll be consistent. And speaking about consistency, just to go off on a tangent about that a bit, because people might find it interesting. I believe there was a phenomenon called like pod fading. I don't know if that's an official term that's caught on. But essentially it's the concept that every podcast tends to stop after about 5 episodes or less. But if you manage to get past like probably like a 10 to 20 mark and you're doing them weekly, it's a lot easier to keep them going consistently and build a consistent fan base, which in return would ideally help the podcast finance itself. So it actually makes money. You get advertisers, the audience, so that there's actually an incentive for the people on the podcast. However, if you're just starting a podcast with your friends, you're not making any money on it whatsoever, you're just kind of hanging out, what tends to happen is it's just tedious. If you're doing it in person, it can be hard. Like, okay, I have to drive 30 minutes for my podcast that gets a pretty minimal amount of downloads or views on platforms. So I think an incentive of some kind is always really great for people, even if that's like, hey, our branding now has merch that you can talk about, you can see more professional. Your brand now has podcast links. So even if people aren't necessarily signing up for free trials and stuff like that, you still have those links so people know like, oh yeah, they know how to reach out for advertisers. This may be a little bit bigger than just somebody in their bedroom talking into a microphone, which 90% of the time a podcast is, but it helps you elevate yourself just a little bit from the competition just to seem more professional.
I think feeling professional is a big part of people, being more proud of their projects. Whereas, a lot of people won't be inclined to, say, oh yeah, I do a podcast. But if you say, oh yeah, no, I was just doing a podcast, we got sponsored by X brand. And then people will be like, oh wow, you must be doing really good with your podcast if you're getting, brand deals. And oh yeah, we're bringing on hosts and guests. And, it feels like a small business more than just like, a little side hustle project that you do in your free time. It just feels more of a presentable project that you're working on.
And down the line, when I'm able to do more of a producer role, I'd love to be able to own a studio of some kind, help like hire like comedians and stuff like that just to make funny shit, almost in a similar to the way that Smosh does it or any other kind of YouTube business does it. I'd love to have something like that later down the line. But obviously pipe dreams and all that, but you have to work towards it slowly in whatever way you can. If you don't catch on, get lucky, find a way to get money. And money can help you get lucky. Because money can help SEO, it can help people be interested in your projects. A lot of it rolls around money. I know I've been saying that a lot, but
for the people who think, oh, it's not all about money, it isn't. Money doesn't make your content good, but it helps good content get seen. And that's like the biggest thing that a lot of people think. Yeah. A lot of people will think, oh, if I buy the best equipment and, I buy advertising and all this, my podcast is going to get famous. You got to have a really good, you got to have something really good first, and then you use that money to elevate it. So maybe your show's fantastic. You got great hosts, great chemistry. Then you buy new microphones. You buy some more equipment. Maybe you do buy that advertising space. And it's like, it elevates you. It doesn't make you good. It can just help more people notice how good you are.
Your content is allowed to be shitty.
Yeah.
I think that's something a lot of people need to hear. Your content is allowed to be shitty. However, you can work towards it not being shitty, but you have to put out something shitty first. I put out a fucking Walking Dead Let's Play in the beginning of like 2013. And that was my first Let's Play series. That was my first attempt to regularly put something out online. And without those baby steps, I wouldn't be able to use Premiere properly to be able to edit my content or podcast. I edit my podcast on Premiere, but that's just me.
It's a controversial statement, but
controversial
we'll
statement.
go
I don't use
that.
I don't use an audio platform to edit my podcast. But and that applies to like anything. You have to put out shitty projects in order to get good projects. And once you get to a point where you're putting out good projects or even passable, something you're proud of projects, if you're able to put those out consistently, then you can start spending money, like you said, on equipment or stuff that might help you on the back end, depending on what your platform is. So, for example, on YouTube, SEO is pretty important, and just trying to find out how to best use your budget. Yeah. As somebody who's never gotten more than $10 or $20 from YouTube, that's coming from experience.
I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize. Like, I don't particularly like the Joe Rogan podcast, but you see where he is today with a fantastic studio, great audio quality. He's got ad reads. He's got crazy amounts of guests. Before, it used to be...
It was on Skype.
Recorded in... Yeah, it was Skype interviews in his bedroom with just the junkiest equipment. And his content was still great. He was still funny. He was still charismatic. The guests coming on, maybe they're talking on their phones with their webcams, and they sounded terrible, but he was still creating content that grabbed people's attention, that people were interested in, and then you elevate it from that point. Same with like any YouTuber you've seen online. They started somewhere where they were recording on an iPhone. They're recording not on an iPhone, like a flip phone, or maybe like a digital camera pointed towards them. They don't have a viewfinder. They can't see what they're looking at. Mm-hmm. You got to start humble beginnings, and you work your way up. Like, I think everyone in the Buzz podcasting group at one point has done something.
Minecraft Let's Plays, some
cringy stuff on YouTube. Like myself, I started doing Let's Plays. It got me interested in audio. I was already interested in film, and I thought, well, I can't do movies. I only have a camcorder. Did Let's Plays, got interested in audio. Now I have, this is the second podcast I've worked on seriously. I am an audio engineer for actual work. And, you take that experience and you start and you go somewhere. And you never know until you try. And I've seen people who've tried to pay me to buy them a bunch of equipment, say, how do I make my podcast sound amazing? I'm like, well, what's your podcast even supposed to be? You haven't recorded a single episode yet. You don't know what it is. And it's like, or to anything that matter.
I've had that exact same question sent at me for people who want to start a podcast and then they buy the equipment and then they end up losing who was their potential host, or they just end up not going through with it. Now they have all these mics and fancy mixers and shit, and they never end up using them. I still use a Blue Snowball microphone because they're consistent. They're not the best, but they're relatively cheap and consistent. I didn't buy a sound mixer until like last year. So
yeah,
you could fucking start in a flip phone. I think J.J. Abrams said something pretty similar. Like you can literally make a movie on your phone. Like your phone, chances are if you have a phone made in the last few years, it can do at least 1080 or 4K. You have a lot less excuses nowadays to be able to just put something out, and learn to ask the right questions too. Don't just say, how do I become a popular YouTuber? Or how do I get to 1 million subscribers in a year? It's just not going to happen. Ask, okay, how do I do this on a budget? How do I improve SEO? How do I make a good thumbnail? You need to look at the components of it and figure that out. Do your research. So just do it, figure out what you're doing, and then make a plan, and then just go for it.
Words to live by, I guess. Well, you kind of already said something inspirational, but before we close out the podcast, do you have any words of wisdom for the listeners other than the words of wisdom you just dropped on us?
Don't be afraid to reach out to people either. The only reason I know you, Keith, is because Andy reached out to me from a fucking YouTube creator forum years ago. So that's how I know you. I knew Bad Ghost from playing Gmod. Networking is so important in any job field. Just reach out to people. Chances are they might ignore you. If you try to reach out to PewDiePie, they'll probably just ignore you. But if you reach out to people on your level or people you really admire and you have something like, hey, I made this, would you want to look at it? Like if you make a good meme, like, and you reach out to like somebody like Gus Johnson, the meme king himself, if you have something to show for it, like that interaction means a lot more for you from a growth perspective, because you can be like, oh yeah, now this person I respect saw it and they enjoyed it. Okay, I'm on the right path. Or if you're trying to find other people to be in your content, collaboration is also super important, like I said earlier, for cross-pollinating the audiences, making friends online. It basically goes into every aspect of just living on the internet today. Also, if you get ignored initially,
Give it some time.
Probably don't message them again for a while. Or just don't do it for a bit. Like, don't annoy people. That's not worth saying. But try to reach out and collaborate the best you can.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Keaton. Mr. Buzz himself.
Shit. You're right.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I mean, I've been on your podcast before. Make sure to check it out. The Buzz on youtube.com. Where else can they find you?
We're on all podcast platforms for Real Good Stuff. If you type in Real Good Stuff, like a film reel, you can find it that way. I also would like to shout out like Season 3 podcast and the Carney Cast. You can typically find those pretty easy on podcast platforms. Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Google Play Podcasts, because they have 2 different platforms for some reason. Deezer for some reason. Castbox, whatever the fuck that is. They're on all of them because I took the time to figure out how to put them on every possible platform for the time being. So they're there. If you want to try to find my content more easily, there is the BuzzNet on Twitter, but I barely use that Twitter account. But my personal Twitter account that I make tons of announcements about the Buzz and the content that I'm involved in will be at DefendTheEnd on Twitter. That's the place where I'm most active.
He makes funny tweets, guys. Go follow him.
I don't know if I agree with that, but thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And, hopefully we talk to you again in the future.
All right. Bye.
Have a good one. Bye. Thank you, kind listener, for staying tuned to this episode of Very Interesting People. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, I'd suggest go checking out our fantastic guest, Keaton. Check out his podcast, Real Good Stuff. Check out the Buzz YouTube channel. He's got some other good stuff on there too. But if you want some more of our show, Very Interesting People, you can find us on all our podcast platforms, iTunes, Google, Spotify, and Stitcher as Very Interesting People Podcast. Can't miss it. It's the #1 search result, thankfully. You can also check us out on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at the VIP Cast. If you want to support the show even further, you can head over to patreon.com/Kiefer Campney, and that's me, to help fund the show as well as my other projects. I got some cool stuff coming up the pipeline. There's a few posts on there now for some sneak peeks from outtakes of the podcast. A couple outtakes from this episode specifically too. So please go check it out. It's really great. Anyway, thanks again. Hopefully you stick around for future episodes because there are plenty more interesting people coming your way.